All right. Yeah, let's jump right into it. Who here knows what a DePIN is? Okay, that's fair. Then maybe I spend some seconds on DePINs, right? It is these decentralized physical infrastructure networks. That means you have some physical infrastructure in the back end. It could be a server, it could be an 5G antenna, it could be anything, and you provide the service, to whoever needs, mobile coverage or whatsoever. And the secret is really you crowdsource the infrastructure. This is the secret. And there used to be like just a couple of them. The early days was Filecoin, Helium. Nowadays there's, I don't know, 700. I lost track. I think a good dissection is to understand there's like physical resource networks. These are the guys who put antennas on their rooftops for 5G or for weather data or whatever, or some sensors in their cars. And there's a digital resource network, which is, Filecoin and all the other guys where you just provide a server basically for compute, storage, and whatsoever. Well, then next question. Who knows what tokenomics are? Yeah, fair enough. So I'm working at 1KX. I'm a researcher, but my bread and butter is basically token designs and tokenomics. And yeah, as Vitalik put it, you don't really know what it is, and you should not talk about it. How I would define it, or what I typically talk about with protocols, is the economic design of a protocol. Because your protocol, yes, developers, right, they love the tech stack, they love the software, but if you think about the token economy, it has economy in it. So you should also think about that, because if you leave this out of the picture, typically your protocol is just software stack, right? So that's why I want to talk a little bit about that. Are there actually any economists in the audience? Okay, so you guys made better life choices than I did. Okay, so I don't want to go through all that, but the basic message is it's all about supply, demand, and balancing this. Sounds easy, but as you can see from the chart, looking through your protocol and who's doing what, that can get complicated. We don't have too much time, so I will not get into all of that. I want to talk about some core functions and how they relate, especially with respect to DePINs, right? These physical infrastructure networks, they have something special, and these are these roles. And yeah, let me quickly walk you through what this is. Because wherever you look at any DePIN, and the link in the bottom has some research where I skimmed through hundreds of DePINs to understand, okay, how can I abstract it? And this is kind of like the condensed version of like, okay, if I abstract it, any DePIN always needs these functions or roles, how I call them. And yeah, it's actually also quite obvious, as most economical stuff is. You have a user, and he needs, I don't know, mobile coverage. So he requests a service, give me a signal, I want that. Or he wants to store something, give me storage. So he requests work. Typically, he does so either directly with somebody who has storage, like Filecoin, right? He goes to the storage provider. He says like, yeah, I have free storage, be my guest. Sometimes there's some abstraction layer. It's the gateway. We first go to the gateway, think about Pocket for RPC request. You go to a gateway, and then the gateway distributes to whoever nodes on the backend can basically serve your request. Now, the tricky thing is these service nodes in the DePINs, they are decentralized, so anybody can do it. How can I trust the guy I gave my data that he really stored it? There's typically some sort of verification, and that function is the validator or watcher. And what they do is, they say like, yeah, it's all good, and they do some proofs or whatsoever. And what they do is they typically store that proof on the blockchain, which serves as your accounting layer, right? Where you also store all sorts of track records on the payments exchange, so on and so forth. So yeah, don't want to go too much into detail on that. Maybe as a takeaway, there are different roles in your protocol, and actually you can expand that beyond DePIN, but in the DePIN space, as we talk today, these are the main characters, these are the roles you need to think about. Now, the thing is, okay, I have a service I want to spell out, I have my protocol, how do I get these guys to do what I want? And what you do is basically you say, okay, come on, I give you some tokens for providing your storage supply because I have this great business model. And then with this provided storage, I will find customers. Eventually, they will pay. And with this payment, I can attract more supply guys, more storage. I can offer better services, and there goes my flywheel, right? Another cool thing in DePIN, it's quite simple. The flywheel is actually always the same. The roles are very similar. The flywheel is typically the same. Now, how do we do it? It's also quite similar. When you think about reward emissions, these initial tokens that you need to give away, because initially there's no one paying for your service, so you give award tokens. And if you look across DePINs, I'm pretty sure you also find it like outside the DePIN sector, there's typically just two emission schedules that you can follow. The one is kind of like the Bitcoin classic on the left side from your side, just decaying over time. And I fix it over time, every whatever 4 years it's halvening, and then you get this. Arweave follows the same approach. A bunch of protocols follow this one. The right side is a little bit more sophisticated. It's KPI based, where you say, okay, it's not just time based. I have certain KPIs that I want to achieve. For example, Filecoin, they have these baseline, kind of like a capacity that they want to reach. And if the network has more capacity, if you have too much supply, then they actually cap the rewards accordingly. So this is more the KPI based. And as you can see from this example from LivePeer, the resulting token emission, this is the solid green line, looks a little bit less predictable as the time-based. And again, as I said, typically any DePIN that you find will follow in each of these categories. There's some small nuance in the sense of like, is it decaying or is it constant? Not going to want to go too much into detail here, because the cool thing I want to show you is, if you look at the data, another thing that's quite common across DePINs, they're very similar. Complex chart, let me briefly explain what it is. So on the x-axis is just time since inception, basically. And on the y-axis, it's the total the token supply that you emit as rewards compared to your total supply ever. So for Bitcoin, you would basically divide by 21 million, right? And for the other ones accordingly. And what you can see is, you look at all these DePINs, and they all do different stuff. They all have different models, but the reward emission is always quite similar. You start typically between around 0.5% of a total supply until 1%, and then after 2 years, ideally, you slow down with emissions, which makes sense because eventually you also want to have some revenue that pays that, right? So we had the first piece of our economic design, which is just like, okay, the rewards, how do we structure them? Turns out, okay, just follow the example of everybody else, and there you go with your emission schedule. So this way you can incentivize the supply. Now, is this all that needs for the economic design for your protocol? As you guess, probably not. Because let's maybe look at Filecoin right now. Don't want to go through the whole P&L that's shown here, but what it shows at the bottom, not sure if you can see it, this is a big negative sign. And the issue is, with Filecoin, they are still paying a lot of token rewards, right? Each month, like over 20 million in token rewards that are emitted. And you can contrast that. I'm not sure if you see the line above. Maybe you can try this cool pointer thingy. No, doesn't really show. But what you see above the red circle is $13,000. This is what the miner actually gets. So you pay them 20 millions to run the server architecture, the storage, and all this. Like it's really big infrastructure that they run, and customers paying $13,000 a month. So obviously this is quite low compared to the effort you do. On the other hand, you also say, okay, is it the low income that's the issue, or is it the high cost? And basically both, right? Because when you think about your economic design, you as a designer can steer either or. So what I mean is, let's maybe look at the income side, right? I mean, we know it's low for DePIN sector. It's hyped. DePIN, everybody talks about DePIN, but if you look at the actual revenues, it's just over the whole sector, it's just a couple of millions. And the funky detail is, this is not even the revenue that goes to the actual miners, right? For example, some of this Filecoin revenue shown here, it's the miners paying that as some sort of penalty fee, and that counts as protocol revenue. But yeah, just as a side note, because what I want to allude to is when you talk about the income side, how can you manage the income side? Well, income, the revenue of your protocol. And again, Econ 101, revenue is price times volume. And here we go again, like how do you set your price? You can choose. You can design it as you want because you're the head of your protocol. You can pick and choose. And guys, different protocols do it differently. For example, Helium, they say 0.1 cent, whatever, per gigabyte data volume that you do. Don't quote me. I don't know the exact number, but it's just a fixed price for service you use, right? On the other hand, you have Ethereum, where every block basically it's auctioned off. It's supermarket based. It's auction. The price every block is separate, right? You have a very market-based price finding mechanism that also changes each block. And then in between, you actually have some different approaches. Filecoin, for example, is somewhat market-based because you, as a user, you go to Filecoin and you can choose between different offers of different storage providers, what they offer as a price. And another piece is also that you can also change that. Pocket used to be a fixed price. They had it baked in their formula, how they charge. Now they switched to different models. Now they have gateway providers. And the gateway providers can basically tell you, okay, I charge you this price. And if you don't like it, you can go to the other gateway providers. So they went from the rather fixed price approach to a more market-based approach. Similar topic related to price. Typically, how DePINs start is they charge a very low price. Not to say they charge nothing. Typically, you get to use them for free. And that's something you need to also keep in mind when you think about your economic design for your protocol. When you run a DePIN, here, Pocket network, the green line is the demand, so to speak, the relays they served. You see, it looks like the typical DePIN flywheel story of, oh, we kicked off the supply. The gray line are the number of nodes that serve the network. Kicked off, exponential growth, nice. The demand follows suit, also exponentially increases. This is the start of the flywheel, we're good. The only thing they forgot is utilization is not monetization. And in Q4 2023, they decided to basically say, okay, let's lower the amount of free tiers we give away. Let's actually charge a proper price for our service. And as you can see, then a lot of the users that were loyal users before just said, now I need to pay something and I'm not using your service anymore. Other part of the income side and pricing logic, I don't want to go too much into that because it's a complex topic. It's afternoon. Again, just listing you that all these different design decisions that you can make is the pricing logic, but then you can also distribute who gets what. Again, Pocket is a network where they say, okay, the network used to charge you like a certain amount for the relay that you request. They switched now and says like, oh, you know what? We no longer want to be in the sales business. We don't want to sell stuff. We actually decentralized the sales teams. Selling happened at the gateway function. So they decentralized their gateways, and each gateway can now set a price, which is actually nice because you outsourced your sales stuff basically to anybody who wants to run a gateway. The only thing you use as a network, you're like, okay, how do you earn money then if you basically let anybody else collect the money? That's why they said no. For any gateway, for any relay that you serve, you need to pay like a certain fixed price, 85 cents per million requests or something like that. And this is this black line at the bottom, right? It's like the network needs to be paid. But what the gateway charges on top, this is totally their decision. They can set the price that they want. And again, this is just coming back to the price setting. Is like you can define the price logic. You can define who is allowed to set the price, who not. And you can tie this to any other economic aspect that you want. With interest of time, let's also jump to the cost aspect because I said earlier, right? These networks have, it doesn't look great because the income seems low, And the cost side, yeah, we don't even know, right? Because if you look around any protocol and you ask them, okay, what's the cost to operate Filecoin? What's the cost to operate Ethereum, right? Like, I'm not sure if there's an answer to that. And we ask ourselves this question as well. And for example, did a framework for Pocket, which will also publish soon. So trust me on the numbers for now. You can challenge us once we publish this research piece. For example, Pocket is roughly $200,000 per month to basically run all the servers, to run the gateways, to also run the blockchain, the Pocket blockchain, to settle all these transactions, to pay all the roles that I mentioned earlier. This is the estimated cost. And why is this so interesting? I mean, this brings you back to like, I need to balance supply demand. I kind of like, first, yes, I need to incentivize people, but eventually, people need to pay enough that I can pay the bills, right? This is, again, Econ 101, and you kind of like need to do it with your protocol as well. The cool thing is you have so many different ways that you can do it and decide how you want to do it. You can change it over time. You have tons of degrees of freedom. Just a quick note on Pocket, because when you look at that, we saw that earlier that the nodes, the gray line went up tremendously. Obviously, that means if each node basically has similar cost base, your network cost goes up as well. And this is typically not good, because if you want to scale a business, your cost shouldn't go up with your supply, right? At one point, if you double your demand, your cost shouldn't double. And that actually also happened with Pocket. Initially, they had these bad unit economics, but then the node runners, they got chunked down the cost, had a bunch of initiatives, not going to go into that for now. But where they are right now is basically, okay, if they are where they are right now, they are at a stage where they can scale because they got the cost in place. Now, when they 5x their demand, basically, the costs don't grow as much. And then that's why they eventually become profitable. Not going to talk about the accounting layer because this is a whole nother level. Just a simple message, which I guess is easy to understand. LivePeer started on Ethereum and had Ethereum as their accounting layer. Obviously, in 2020, 2021, right, when the bull market was, there was a huge amount of cost for anybody who was operating LivePeer. So it was technically a huge cost to the network. It was like 100 ETH, I think, in a month or something like that. Arbitrum came along, so it was very natural for them to just say, like, hey, we know over 95% of our total cost base is we pay for Ethereum. Let's move to Arbitrum, and now the cost is like, I think, for sure less than 2 ETH a month or something like that. Because yeah, I wanna summarize because I know it was a lot, especially since there are no economists here. But the message is the economic design that you can define. It's all in your control. You need to think about supply, demand. How much can you charge your customers? How much do you need to pay your supply that they keep operating? And if this is imbalanced, you probably need to tackle either way, right? The first thing to do that is you define the roles. You need to understand, in my network, who is doing what. And also think about what do you centrally own right now versus what can you centralize along the way, because you can change the roles. The operating cost, I mentioned that as well. This is the one piece on your supply side. If you feel you're not getting enough income and somehow you can scale it up, look at your cost side, monitor them, understand them like, okay, how do I get them down? Because you really, whenever you launch a token, whenever the bull market, the price will be up, you have good runway, so to speak, to incentivize the supply, but you really want to incentivize a scalable supply side. Because if it's not scalable, the next bear market, basically, the supply side will just say, okay, you can't pay me anymore, I'm out of here. Yeah, the other things I talked about, define the pricing logic, also allow yourself to adjust reward emissions. I like it a lot when you kind of like keep yourself flexible because you never know what's happening on your product side, on the market side. So keeping flexible is good. And for sure, I think the main message is you don't need to do anything yourself, right? There's tons of other projects, tons of other protocols, tons of other builders. just see what they already do, how we can integrate, how we can maybe outsource, collaborate, things like that. Yeah, and that's, I guess, my main message from this little economics lesson. I hope it was not too dry. And yeah, I guess we still have room for one question, two.
We have time for a few questions, actually. Okay. So, yeah, thank you, Robert, for your amazing presentation, and we have time for maybe 3 or 4 questions. So, yeah, thank you. Anyone? Yeah.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I want to ask you, because I saw the slide of the Filecoin. So you see there is a huge discrepancy between what a customer pays and what they pay for the storage providers. And I know storage providers invested like hundreds of millions for the bare metal to run this. So what is their fix for this, in your opinion?
I mean, yeah, how they fix it, I mean, they need to figure it out. I mean, they're still well funded, right? Big ecosystem. I think they're already on a good traction to actually foster a lot on the demand side as well, because that used to be a problem, because Filecoin is a good example. They had a huge, basically, budget in the last bull run. There were months where this 20 million now in miner emissions used to be almost $1 billion in a month, for the storage provider. So for sure, the storage providers, they got a lot of money to operate. So even if it's less now, I would guess they got decently funded. But yeah, for them, I would say for sure they need to tackle more on the demand side, which they do, right? FEVM, integrations, ecosystem build out. But they also learned the lesson that, yeah, that takes time. But yeah, also the good side is they actually tackled costs as well. Like the ceiling costs used to be tremendously high. They cut it by 90%. But again, it feels to me like they need to speed up a little bit because, to your point, eventually, there's a lot of money, the operation costs. But yeah, that's why it's so important if you design a protocol, think a little bit upfront how you think things might play out.
Want that?
Thank you. So one of your takeaways was to allow yourself to be adaptable with the emission. I will worry that if I have to make, let's talk about Filecoin, I have to make the decision about providing storage for others. I would want to have some kind of predictability to make my decision. So something like this dramatically increases my risk because then I don't know anything about what will happen. So don't you think that affects very negatively the actual service provider for this infrastructure? Yeah, and it's a good question and good point, because I think the wording is probably a little bit misleading. I'm not meaning that you want to be the protocol that says like, okay, I have 20% of my allocation for rewards, but how it's done, we throw a dice each week and see where it lands. It's really more about, in the early days, people follow a lot just blindly the Bitcoin model of like, yeah, halving over this amount of time. It's really super predictable, and this is how we go, which also means after 4 years, after 8 years, or after 12 years, eventually, the fiat value of these emissions will just dry out. And then either we made it or not, and that's it. So you want to probably a little bit be more flexible in that regard to say, hey, I know these guys have fiat costs. Maybe I should have a token reward model that gives them a base fiat model that they can plan for. If they can guarantee them, no matter what the token price does, you get $1,000 each month because I know your operation is $500, so you get this plus a profit, could be a good token model. Creates other problems down the line as well, right? But this is exactly the discussion or the thinking you need to have of like, okay, how can I think about it? Because yeah, if you don't think about it and just copy, some plain schedule because it looks good in a paper and feels like, oh, cool, math, sounds nice, then eventually you basically, you mustn't run into issues, but you steal yourself a big opportunity to, be more flexible and actually optimize your own degrees of freedom in your economic design.
I guess we have time for one more.
All right, thanks. This is great information. Really appreciate it. My question's about kind of growing the demand side. So for these networks like Arweave and Filecoin, right, that have existed and bootstrapped their supply side, and they have a Web 2 competitor that's out there. How do you think about the unit economics of using something like an Arweave or Filecoin compared to a Web 2 competitor?
Yeah, I need to be mindful of time, but there's two things to it. The one thing I would say is, for sure, there are more flexible in expanding their use case. I mean, the AO computer, for example, for Arweave, complete new use case will help fostering demand as well. The other thing is, typically decentralization is always seen as like disadvantage. But for example, if you look about the story of Uber and how Uber scaled so quickly, I think the guy recently also tweeted about it. They put, decentralized teams, super small, and these were their sales teams. And they would say, like, you go in this city, you go in this city, this city. So decentralization of your sales, similar to Pocket, is just another approach to just say, actually, I just want to have like more traffic on my side. Who's doing it? I give it lots of degrees of freedom I outsource it to other guys. But since I have this token to coordinate, I have this mechanism to coordinate, they can do it all over the world because my infrastructure is already integrated. There's another way. There's for sure more, but these two things all alone are something where I feel like this decentralization of sales teams, for example, as I call it, I haven't seen that so much yet. I haven't seen sales teams anyway in DePIN so much. But this is for sure something where I feel like, okay, why actually not? For sure, I can see the way we are super early, so there are reasons why not. But I feel like we are at a time where we could explore this path and just follow the learnings from Web 2 because Web 3 seems even more destined to apply this.
Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you so much for your presentation again, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, guys.